The shocking images are still reverberating around the globe. Delta Force soldiers storming President Nicolás Maduro's bedroom in the pre-dawn hours. A blindfolded leader being hauled onto the USS Iwo Jima. President Trump watching it all unfold from Mar-a-Lago like, in his own words, a television show. But at Monday's emergency UN Security Council meeting, the spectacle gave way to something Trump likely didn't anticipate: near-universal condemnation.
The principles of sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity must be respected. The inviolability of borders is not up for negotiation. These are universal, sacrosanct principles enshrined in international law. They apply everywhere. Mr. President, once again, Denmark calls on all parties to urgently de-escalate tensions that could threaten peace and stability in the region and beyond. International disputes should be settled by peaceful means, as stated in the UN Charter.
The meeting, convened at Venezuela and Colombia's request with support from Russia and China, laid bare a fundamental rupture in the international order. UN Secretary-General António Guterres pulled no punches, stating he was deeply concerned that rules of international law have not been respected. His warning carried particular weight. The actions constitute a dangerous precedent. France's UN envoy captured the broader anxiety when he warned that the operation chips away at the very foundation of international order. Russia's ambassador was even more direct. We cannot allow the United States to proclaim itself as some kind of a supreme judge. These weren't just rhetorical flourishes from America's adversaries. Even NATO ally Denmark's ambassador felt compelled to declare at the meeting that the inviolability of borders is not up for negotiation, a thinly veiled rebuke that also referenced Trump's recent threats toward Greenland. The facts on the ground are stark. Saturday's pre-dawn operation involved over 150 aircraft striking multiple targets across Venezuela. Reports indicate approximately 80 people were killed, including 32 Cubans, prompting Havana to declare 2 days of national mourning. Maduro and his wife Celia Flores were seized from their home and flown to New York to face drug trafficking charges first filed in 2020. Trump has called it one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might in history. But that display has come at a price that extends far beyond the immediate casualties. Far from being chastened by the international backlash, Trump has remained defiant. In remarks aboard Air Force One Sunday, he made clear the U.S. is prepared to conduct more military attacks and reiterated his belief that America is now in charge of Venezuela. The administration says it will run Venezuela until there's a safe, proper, and judicious transition of power, though Trump hasn't ruled out a years-long occupation with boots on the ground. His vision for Venezuela is tellingly transactional. Trump repeatedly emphasized that American oil companies would go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, and make a lot of money. When asked about popular opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize and enjoys a 72% approval rating among Venezuelans, Trump dismissed her, claiming she doesn't have the support or the respect within the country. The U.S. military operation in Latin America since the 1989 invasion of Panama, the Venezuela strike has sent shockwaves well beyond Caracas. Colombia deployed security forces along its border, preparing for refugees. Brazil's Lula condemned the action as crossing an unacceptable line and a very serious affront to the sovereignty of Venezuela. Mexico called it a violation of the UN Charter. Perhaps most revealing were the reactions from nations that might see themselves as potential targets. Iran, facing its own internal unrest and Trump's threats, called it a clear violation of the basic principles of the United Nations Charter. Cuba labeled it state terrorism, acutely aware that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, when asked if Cuba was next, said only, "The Cuban government is a huge problem," before declining to rule out future action. Even some U.S. allies expressed discomfort. Britain's Keir Starmer said the UK would shed no tears about Maduro's ouster, but notably added his support for international law without elaborating. Spain and France explicitly said the operation violated international law. Germany said it needed time to evaluate this complex situation. On Capitol Hill, reactions have split predictably along partisan lines, though with some notable exceptions. Senate Leader John Thune praised the operation as decisive action, while House Republicans largely rallied behind their party leader. But even some Republicans expressed concern about the constitutional implications. Democratic reactions ranged from cautious to scathing. Senator Tim Kaine called Maduro terrible, but added that Trump put American service members at risk with this unauthorized attack. Senator Jeanne Shaheen complained that without understanding the administration's long-term strategy, we are left with no understanding of how the administration is preparing to mitigate risks to the U.S. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries was more direct, calling it an act of war and demanding that Congress ensure no further military steps occur absent explicit congressional approval. But as NPR noted, focusing solely on the legality of the move could be a political pitfall for Democrats. Trump has proven adept at painting his opponents as defending drug dealers and dictators. The constitutional question is thorny. The Constitution assigns Congress the right to declare war, last exercised during World War II. Since then, presidents have initiated military action using their commander-in-chief powers. The 1973 War Powers Resolution requires presidents to report to Congress within 48 hours and terminate military action within 60 days unless approved. Secretary of State Marco Rubio acknowledged that Congress was not briefed in advance, with Trump explaining he feared leaks. Democratic Senator Mark Warner, vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, raised a fundamental question. Does this mean any large country can indict the ruler of a smaller adjacent country and take that person out? It's a question that has haunted international observers from the moment Delta Force landed in Caracas. Perhaps the most stunning moment of Trump's Saturday press conference was his dismissal of Maria Corina Machado, Venezuela's opposition leader who won the Nobel Peace Prize and dedicated it partly to Trump. When asked if she would lead Venezuela's transition, Trump was blunt. "I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support or the respect within the country." The comment shocked Machado's allies and supporters. According to sources speaking to the Washington Post, Trump's rejection may stem from her acceptance of the Nobel Prize itself. Despite Machado thanking Trump and dedicating the award to him, the fact that she didn't reject it proved an unforgivable sin. One White House source told the Post, if she had rejected it and said, "No, I can't accept it because it belongs to Donald Trump," she would be president of Venezuela today. It's a petty rationale that reveals much about the administration's priorities. Machado enjoys a 72% approval rating among Venezuelans and has led the Democratic opposition for years, enduring persecution, assassination attempts, and forced exile. Yet Trump has chosen instead to work with Delcy Rodriguez, Venezuela's vice president and regime stalwart, who was sworn in as acting president by Venezuela's Supreme Court. "She's essentially willing to do what we think is necessary to make Venezuela great again," Trump said of Rodriguez. The choice has alarmed democracy advocates and Venezuela experts. David Smiled, a Venezuela expert at Tulane University, noted that Trump didn't even mention democracy during his press conference. "It doesn't look like they have in mind a democratic transition. They have in mind a country that is friendly and open to the United States' interests, stable and economically productive." Trump's dismissal of Machado may also reflect Trump's experience with opposition politician Juan Guaidó during his first term. The U.S. recognized Guaidó as Venezuela's lawful president in 2019, as did more than 60 other nations, but his movement stalled and eventually collapsed. He was really backing Juan Guaidó, but it turned wrong, analyst Elias Ferrer told CNN. And then Trump kind of took the hit because he was parading this guy who turned out to be a complete failure. If there was any doubt about the operation's true motivation, Trump dispelled it quickly. "We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country," Trump declared. Venezuela sits on 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the largest in the world, representing about 17% of global reserves. The country was once a major oil producer and founding member of OPEC, but decades of mismanagement under Hugo Chavez and Maduro reduced output from 3.5 million barrels per day in the 1990s to less than 700,000 today. Trump has repeatedly claimed that Venezuela stole American oil investments, referring to nationalizations under Chavez in the 2000s. "We built Venezuela's oil industry with talent, drive, and skill, and the socialist regime stole it from us," Trump said Saturday. Secretary of State Rubio, who has taken the lead on Venezuela policy, emphasized American refineries' capacity to process Venezuela's heavy crude. But the path to rekindling Venezuela's oil sector is far from straightforward. The country's infrastructure is severely degraded after years of underinvestment. Consultancy Rystad Energy estimates it would require $110 billion in capital investment to return Venezuela to its mid-2010s output levels. With global oil prices hovering around $60 per barrel and an oversupplied market, that's a tough sell for oil companies. Industry experts are skeptical. "You just can't walk into Venezuela and pump oil," one analyst told CNN. "It's an exceedingly difficult and complex process." Patrick DeHaan of GasBuddy noted that oil companies in a low-priced environment of today would likely be cautious investing billions with oil prices already low. Companies are also wary given past expropriations under Chavez. According to Politico, when the Trump administration asked U.S. oil companies in December if they were interested in returning to Venezuela, the companies firmly declined. Chevron, the only major U.S. oil company currently operating in Venezuela under a Biden-era sanctions exemption, has remained diplomatically silent, saying only that it will continue to operate in full compliance with all relevant laws and regulations. The irony is rich. Tulsi Gabbard, now Trump's director of national intelligence, vehemently opposed military intervention in Venezuela during Trump's first term, writing in 2019, "It's about the oil again." She cited John Bolton's admission that it would make a difference if we could have American companies produce the oil in Venezuela. Her old tweets criticizing the exact scenario she now oversees have resurfaced with a vengeance. Trump has framed his Venezuela operation within what he calls the Donroe Doctrine, a play on the 1823 Monroe Doctrine that viewed America as the dominant leader in the Western Hemisphere. "The Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot," Trump said. "They now call it the Donroe Doctrine." This reframing is significant. The Monroe Doctrine warned European powers against further colonization in the Americas. Trump's version appears to assert U.S. hegemony not just against external powers, but over the hemisphere itself. It's a vision that has alarmed Latin American leaders across the political spectrum. Brazil's President Lula, who has maintained dialogue with both Maduro and the opposition, called the action a very serious affront to the sovereignty of Venezuela that crosses an unacceptable line. Mexico's president condemned it as violating the UN Charter. Chile's foreign minister stated that the Venezuelan crisis must be resolved through dialogue and the support of multilateralism, and not through violence or foreign interference. Colombia, which shares a long border with Venezuela, deployed security forces in anticipation of refugee flows. President Gustavo Petro has been conspicuously measured in his comments, likely aware that his country will bear many of the operation's immediate consequences. The hawkish turn is particularly striking given Trump's campaign rhetoric against endless wars and nation-building. Yet in less than 12 months of his second term, he has conducted strikes in 7 countries: Iran, Nigeria, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, and now Venezuela. NPR noted that to call the action surprising and eye-opening doesn't quite do it justice, especially considering Trump made his bones in opposition to neoconservatives' endless wars. The operation appears to reflect the growing influence of Secretary of State Marco Rubio, whose Cuban heritage and long-standing hawkishness on Latin America have positioned him as Trump's point person on Venezuela. During the news conference, Trump frequently deferred to Rubio, who attempted to reframe the president's comments about running Venezuela as merely running the direction of policy. In Caracas, an uneasy calm has settled over the capital. Streets typically filled with runners and cyclists sat largely empty Sunday. Convenience stores, gas stations, and other businesses remained mostly closed. Lines wound through the few open supermarkets as uncertain Venezuelans stocked up on goods in case turmoil broke out. Venezuela's presidential palace now guarded by armed civilians and members of the military. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, in her role as acting president following a Supreme Court order, described Maduro as Venezuela's only president and called for calm and unity to defend the country amid what she termed his kidnapping. Her brother, Jorge Rodriguez, president of the National Assembly, swore her in as acting president Monday. Venezuela will never again be a colony of any empire, Delcy Rodriguez declared. Despite her defiant words, she has reportedly been in contact with Secretary Rubio, though the substance of those conversations remains murky. The FAA issued a notice prohibiting U.S. aircraft from operating within Venezuelan airspace, citing ongoing military activity. Trump has suggested the U.S. is prepared to conduct additional strikes if necessary, telling NBC News the military is ready for much bigger second-wave attacks. The human toll of Saturday's operation remains disputed. Venezuelan Attorney General Tarek William Saab reported innocent victims have been mortally wounded and others killed by this criminal terrorist attack. Initial reports spoke of 40 killed, though by Sunday that number had risen to 80 according to senior Venezuelan officials, including both civilians and security forces. Cuba reported 32 Cubans killed, all members of armed forces and intelligence services. Trump acknowledged the Cuban casualties, saying, many Cubans lost their lives last night. That was not a good move. 2 U.S. soldiers were injured in the operation, though Trump said neither injury was life-threatening. The images that emerged, charred vehicles at the Fuerte Tiuna military complex, a civilian apartment building in Katia Lamar with its exterior wall destroyed, tell the story of a massive military assault. Trump called it an assault like people have not seen since World War II, involving overwhelming military power, air, land, and sea. The most fundamental question remains unanswered. What is America's endgame in Venezuela? Trump has said the U.S. will run the country until there's a safe, proper, and judicious transition, but he hasn't specified what that means, how long it will take, or who will lead that transition. He mentioned designating various people and working with a group, but provided no details. When pressed about U.S. troops on the ground, Trump suggested the only American presence would pertain to oil, meaning oil company employees rather than military forces. Yet he also acknowledged he hasn't ruled out boots on the ground for an extended occupation. The contradictions abound. The Center for Strategic International Studies published an analysis titled The Maduro Raid, a military victory with no viable endgame, noting that while the capture was brilliantly executed, Maduro's officials remain in charge, and the administration's plans to work through these officials while ignoring the democratic opposition will likely fail, requiring additional air and missile strikes. Notre Dame Law School professor Mary Ellen O'Connell, who specializes in international law and conflict resolution, drew parallels to Iraq. President Trump is right to take action against illicit drugs, but his actions in Venezuela are not the ones proven to succeed. Successful economies require strong, independent courts, fair systems of criminal justice, and respect for law. Trump's actions defy these basic components. The best prediction now is that chaos will follow in Venezuela as it did in Iraq. The Iraq comparison is particularly apt. The U.S. removed Saddam Hussein in 2003 with overwhelming military force, only to spend the next decade mired in sectarian violence, insurgency, and nation-building. The promised transition to democracy proved elusive. Oil production, which was supposed to pay for reconstruction, took nearly 2 decades to revitalize, and corruption and mismanagement remain endemic. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced Sunday that Venezuelans in the U.S. previously under temporary protective status can now apply for asylum, a tacit acknowledgement that return to Venezuela won't be safe anytime soon. Trump's embargo on Venezuelan oil remains in full effect, leaving the question of how oil companies will operate in a sanctioned country unanswered. Back in New York, Nicolás Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores appeared in federal court Monday to face narco-terrorism and drug trafficking charges. Maduro, wearing prison garb, declared, "I'm still president," before pleading not guilty. The image of a seated head of state in an American courtroom is unprecedented in modern history, a dramatic symbol of American power projection that has sent shockwaves through capitals worldwide. But the legal case itself faces huge hurdles. The charges, which superseded a 2020 indictment, allege Maduro partnered with drug cartels to traffic thousands of tons of cocaine into the United States. Proving these charges against a head of state will be complex, and Maduro's lawyers are certain to challenge everything from the legality of his capture to the court's jurisdiction. Attorney General Pam Bondi has promised Maduro will face the full wrath of the U.S. justice system, but the prosecution